Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. This is your brother Ustadh Isa Ibn Matta, here to have a very interesting discussion about the state of Islamic and Hirz schools and the impact that it has on the state of the youth and the Muslim community in the West. Today we're joined by Ustadh Irslan Ahmed. And this concept of Islamic schools and Hirz schools. This is not a conversation that I will tell you as a revert. Non-Muslims have no idea that we have this type of infrastructure in our community. Mm-hmm. Completely oblivious. The state of the mosque is one thing. The state of dawah is something else. We've pulled different people to have these different types of conversations under the pretense of understanding why Islam. While the religion is perfect, Islam is a perfect religion practiced by imperfect people. If the only thing we ever present of our religion is the practice, but we never show the people, then it will be very, very hard for us to actually have a safe space in this country, where people actually know who we are and know what we're going through. Not to create a juxtaposition, because they're not the same. The LGBTQ plus community is not like the Muslim community. But you can see how them talking openly about their struggles led to them having a safe space in the workplace, in school, in the community at large, acceptance. So hopefully through this dialogue about one of the most critical, most heavily emphasized, most overly utilized, and easily the most scrutinized dynamic of the Muslim community, hopefully we can raise some awareness amongst ourselves by having a meaningful conversation. So maybe you can just let us know a little bit about your experience in Islamic school, Hirz school. Like, what was your journey like, in I guess, like, in a nutshell?
So, Bismillah, Alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salam ala Rasulullah. So, I would say my experience is unique, at least amongst my peers, in that we went to public school for a while, Alhamdulillah, but we were always in the masjid. Mm-hmm. Parents became more spiritual as we got a little bit older. Randomly, my mom decided one day, hey, why don't we try Hirz school? So I was 9 when I went in the summer, and or 10 actually. And that year we decided to go through with the Hirz, and I decided myself. She put the lunchbox and Quran, in front on the school day. Said, choose which one it was. Mm-hmm. I grabbed them both and said, go to Hirz. So alhamdulillah. So I did the Hirz school after public school. After 4 years, went back to public school. Parents didn't like what took place there, so they pulled me out, took me to Islamic school, alhamdulillah, for 2 years, which was my high school, 10th grade and 11th grade, and then went back to public school for senior year. So yeah, alhamdulillah, I've done it all: homeschooling, public school, and Islamic school, alhamdulillah.
Mm-hmm. And even the process of Hirz, right?
Yeah, and Hirz as well, right.
And even contributed back in teaching Hirz to children, and also teaching Islamic studies as well.
Right, alhamdulillah.
So, my journey with the Quran as a convert is unique, right? Mm-hmm. And from the demographics of youth that I've probably connected with the most are probably Hufad, right? Mm-hmm. Because in many ways, like, my journey as a convert and memorizing Quran and trying to understand it and implement it, it's just like the hearts connect that way, Mm-hmm. But I'm an adult, right? Mm-hmm. I'm not dealing with cultural pressure of, if you don't finish the Quran in 2 years, then what is wrong with you? Or I'm not dealing with, like, the social pressure of, kids making fun of me because I forgot this, or I failed my test, or, so on and so forth. Some people have great experiences because they have great teachers. Other people, it's really, really hard on them, What can you say about that journey of memorizing Quran as a child? And what you saw within yourself and your own development as an adult now, as well as your peers, seeing them back in the Hirz school back then, compared to, like, now.
So there's a lot to unpack with that, subhanAllah. I mean, from the non-Muslim perspective, it's mind-blowing in itself that a kid could dedicate years of his life to just memorizing a book in a language they don't understand. Like, I honestly, after I had finished Hirz, going back to school in 9th grade, although I was kind of doing some dawah with my friends and stuff, which is a whole situation itself, I wasn't really sure, right? Because I didn't understand a word. It wasn't until I read the seerah that I was like, okay, this is it. But going back to the Hirz question you asked about how the pressure is there, finishing within 2 years, social pressures of how, if you're going slow or fast, and what happens afterwards and with your peers and stuff. So there's a lot there. Definitely, there is a lot of pressure to finish on time. on time, meaning within 2 years, 2.5 years. And if you go beyond that, you're kind of put on the side as if you're second class, right? Even those who do it, for them, if you don't have a good voice, they look down at you. If you're not in front of the people and doing things that, the value of the hifd is seen in and how good the kid's voice is, how much he can lead, how many events he can recite at. And so kids are put in a high pedestal, especially where I'm from, where there's very few hufad, right, in the city that I was in. So those kids were put in a place where, like, they were known as the hafiz kid, and they were elevated to a place that many of them, abused, right? And it was bad. But on the flip side, you have those who weren't given any value whatsoever. Like, okay, you're hafiz, but your voice is not good, so you sit in the back. I know a lot of brothers who their hifd was amazing. Their qualities were beautiful. They're always, just showing the sunnah and everything they did. But because their voice wasn't good, or because, they didn't look as good as the others, or whatever the case may be, they were put in the back. They weren't shown the front. A lot of times, it's, as you may know, it's a culture of showing off for a lot of, in a lot of times, and it's sad. It really is sad, because you see both kids on both extremes, they fall off. I know some friends who, subhanallah, they had the voice, they had everything, but they got caught doing some crazy stuff, and it only could manifest in those that felt like they were above everyone else, and so that riyah, that ego, really just destroyed them. And the others, they just left it because no one valued them, no one cared, no one gave them attention. So yeah, we saw that a lot.
And I noticed that just in terms of like pronoun usage, you're using he, right? Because the boys can lead. The boys can be seen, and the extent or the line between Islamic gender relations and cultural gender segregation are so blurred in our community, where these things are not clarified really by people who have a platform to do that clarification, because they're just as immersed in the culture as everyone else, right? So I can only imagine the state of the sisters who tried to take on that journey too, because now, like, you're putting so much responsibility on a child to do something for the sake of God Almighty and to be humble in it, but they don't understand it. But it's such a big deal. But only if you fit this criteria. Like, that can be like a crisis of identity.
Absolutely.
For me, it's always like people diminish any accomplishment I have by way of knowledge or anything, right? Black revert, you like you did that, But for a child who doesn't feel valued, it's like now maybe they have to go out of their way to be seen as significant in something else, so maybe the attention seeking manifests itself in another way. But just listening to what you said, like, something that stands out to me is, even though memorizing the Quran is a big deal in the Muslim community, non-Muslims, for the most part, they have no idea that this is such a significant part of our culture, that there's an entire educational infrastructure created with the express purpose of memorizing this book, right?
Right. So when you diminish the value of it to just your voice, or you diminish it to presentation, you don't focus at all on the meaning of it, you don't focus at all on the value of it, the teachings of it, the practice of it. Like, with our teacher, he didn't really emphasize that at all, right? And I've seen most schools, they don't care about that at all. And so, sadly, the kid doesn't value what he's done, what he spent these years in. He looks back at, like, what have I really accomplished? And so if you can't speak about it in a meaningful way to Muslims, then how can you speak about it in a meaningful way to non-Muslims? So, even when I told people about it, they were shocked, like, you memorized the entire book? And, it shocks you as well, like, wait, I did that, So if there was more validation for it, if there was more actual, like, there was actual way to represent it, right, from a I don't know how to say this, basically from a school's perspective, right? Like, the school can, give you something to signify that I've done something, for your teacher to validate you, for, these things we lack it in the Muslim community. So I don't see how the non-Muslims could even begin to understand, or how we can begin to show to them how much it means to us.
Right.
If that makes sense.
Well, there's also this concept of academic integrity that gets tainted by the cultural colonized mentality that has tainted many of our perceptions of what reflects academic achievement in the Muslim community, right? For me, I can never be a scholar or scholarly or student of knowledge if I don't respond to people in Arabic or speak to them exclusively in the language. If I, memorize the Quran and I'm not getting up and leading the prayer and people don't acknowledge me through those titles and stuff, because I have to fit in their cultural mizan, or I have to fit in their paradigm, their mindset of what a mizan is, of what reflects a person of this caliber, right?
Right.
And that's a hard thing as a convert, but as a child, to try to fit that standard of the mizan, of the scales that people drop you in to say this is what your weight is, that's extremely heavy. You know, as an adult, I can carry that burden. I left everything to be a Muslim. You know, so people liking me or not liking me, regarding me or not, like, I can't care. If I cared, I never would have been a Muslim, least of all stayed one.
Right.
But as a child, where your identity is attached to how much time you put into this and how people recognize you for it, no wonder the Hufad, the memorizers of Quran, hide themselves from their peers. From once they leave, they're gone. If they're not leading, where are they? You know, that's a lot. That's a lot. You know, and I think that's a good segue into Islamic school, right? We don't give our Hufad anything to show that you've accomplished a major milestone outside of the cultural mizan of putting someone in that scale where they may not really know what they're reciting, but as long as they did it, you know, put you right up here. Even compared to other people, like, but he did, you know, like that mizan, it's tilted, it's scuffed, right? But with Islamic school, same thing. You go to Islamic school 3, 4, 5, 6 years. What did you get to show that, like, for that? What has your experience in the Islamic school been by way of its impact of Islamic education and how that plays a role in the Muslim identity of a child, right? And their istiqamah, their steadfastness upon the faith, and how that carries over into the next level of college, especially you going to one of the most like Muslim populated universities in the U.S.
Right. So really quickly, to go back to what you mentioned, I think it's a really important point to make, especially going into this next one, is that you were talking about pressure earlier and asking about that. I think the pressure isn't real until you're done. Not just to review, right? But like when you're there and everyone knows you're the hafiz, all eyes are on you. And so first of all, you're not valued after you've been done. Like you finished, you heard the hadith about all these things, so you thought it was awesome, you did it, but now people begin to scrutinize you and put you under the microscope for everything. Like when I finished school and I was like, I'm going to public school, my sister starts telling me, oh, you know, everyone's saying you're going to be just like the other Hafiz kid. I was like, what does that mean? You know, talk to a girl one time or text somebody, and that was like yeah, haram, it was done, his life is over. You know, so this is the sad thing, is that Hufad, they get so much more pressure on them. Even small mistakes, everyone's looking at, oh, this is why we don't put our kids in Hifz school. This is why I don't associate with these kids, because they're all fake. You got a beard, you're automatically a criminal, you're a hypocrite. And so many Hufad, like you said, they hide themselves because when they look Hafiz, everyone's going to be, you know, paying extra attention to them, which is really, really sad. And this is why a lot of kids, they don't feel proud at all. They don't feel happy at all with the situation they find themselves in. Many of them, they leave it, they forget it. Most Hufad that I've ever met, they don't call themselves Hafiz anymore. And if they do, it's only in Ramadan, you know, when they pick up the Mus'haf. So, did you want to add anything to that?
No, I mean, that's the reality.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a really sad reality. And I mean, you know, in my experience with you, this is a way that I've managed to even connect with some kids to try to re-inspire them, because it's scary.
Yeah.
And the fact that we can't talk about this leads us to reinforcing a vicious cycle that leads to the same results. If you don't memorize Quran and you're not in a position as a young hafida, a young girl who memorizes the Quran, if you don't become like a sheikha and start teaching Quran, and you don't do the halaqat and lead tarawih for the sisters and stuff, who cares? It's only important as a kid. If you don't have a nice voice and fit the look, well, if you fit the look, you're extreme, you're too much. This is why I don't put my kids in Hifz schools. You see what's going on? And now it goes from something that's supposed to be so spiritually driven and so significant for this life and the next. I mean, if you can memorize a whole book, even Okim may not. I mean, Okim is Okim. Like, if you can memorize a whole book, then and take that self-discipline into the academic studies, into the workplace. Put it on your resume. I memorized an entire 600 plus page book. Any employer in a non-Muslim world sees you memorized a book. That's work ethic. That's discipline. That's hard work. You did it in 2 years, 3. You did it in 5 years. You memorized a 604 page book in 5 years. That's like a volume for Harry Potter. That's how they process that. Like, I could have memorized something like that.
Right.
but we don't love it, so we put it down, and that's scary. So now, how much more so for Islamic school education?
So this is what gets tough, because even when I went to public school, and like I mentioned, and as you mentioned, there's so many eyes on you, there's so much pressure on you. It's hard not to mess up. And when you mess up, you begin to think of yourself as an evil person. Like, maybe they're right. Maybe I don't stand for this. Maybe this meant nothing to me. And this is why you start questioning your faith. You get into identity crisis and so on and so forth. But going to Islamic school, transitioning to that life, I think it's even more serious, because you're in an Islamic school and people love to, for some reason, Muslims, I don't know why, we love to attack our own institutions, look for faults. So I tried to give this example because I was traveling with my sheikh, trying to convince people to go to Islamic school and fund Islamic schools. Always ran into this issue. Well, Islamic schools also have these issues, drugs, girlfriend, boyfriend, this stuff. But I mean, that one situation that happened 5 years ago is nothing compared to every kid, doing all these evil things on a daily basis, looking at haram on a daily basis. There's no comparison. So in the same way that we scrutinize Hafadh, we look at an Islamic school and we say, if every kid is not an angel, then the Islamic school is worthless. So,
yes,
I mean, this is what we see,
Right. The thing is, our ummah, the Muslim nation, is extremely hyperbolic, right? If you're not an angel, then Islamic school failed. If you don't come out with this, you don't even know this chapter of the Quran, and you went to Islamic school, hyperbolic. Islamic schools do not equip children from a curriculum perspective with primary knowledge of Islamic sciences, right?
Right.
You're just glossing over, because the only thing that makes it an Islamic school is Islamic school elective or Islamic class electives.
Yeah.
Our Islamic schools are just Muslim majority schools. When I went to seminary school, it was Christianity everywhere. Like, you could not escape it. The school that I went to, they didn't have like a big sports program. They had acro, which is like acrobatics. So everybody did, everybody did acrobatics. Like the Olympic trampolines and like pole vaulting, like all types of like stuff like that. I don't even remember all this stuff. It feels like a lifetime ago. It was like 2 lifetimes ago. But like every part of our school was super Christian. Like, you had to go out of your way to escape the Christian ethics. In the Islamic school, because it's not like it's not permeating Islamic ethics, right? It's just Muslim majority.
Right.
Only time I may hear about Islamic ethics is in Islamic studies class, right?
Yeah.
But then when you blend that cultural integration of haram, 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 forbidden, 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 you can't, not allowed, not allowed. Now the heuristic assessment of a child is, my religion restricts me from doing everything.
Yeah.
So then there becomes an internalized resentment towards Islamic school and Islamic religious figures, right? So on the outside looking in, you have a community that attacks the institution for not producing good results. But then institutionally, you have to deceive yourself into thinking that you are capable of getting better results than you are, because you have not actually put the human resources in place to attain those goals. So it's just like, it's madness.
Yeah.
But you coming out of that, what have you seen the results of Islamic institutions, Muslim majority schools? What impact has that had on the Muslims that you've seen in university, or even coming out of school, like in just we went to Islamic school together, and now, like then and now?
I would say that, in all honesty, there's a lot of, like you said, hyperbolic, usage of terms and phrases to kind of describe each. But for the most part, most of the kids, they came out really, really good, right? At least they understood certain things about Islam that otherwise they would have never been exposed to. I always talked with my sheikh about how, is it worth this much money? Is it worth this much effort? And he was like, if they pray dhuhr every day and you're assuring that, it's worth every dime, subhanAllah. So that really impacted me a lot. And although there was many kids who came out, took off the hijab. Some took it off immediately as they got off campus. Some like one of my friends, he was, he basically he went through a lot, and he ended up drinking, going to Vegas, doing a bunch of crazy stuff. But I mean, you can see, you can point to certain instances that happen outside of the school or within the family that led to that. So I mean, you can't take, you know, an imperfect family structure and problems within the home and then pin all that and say, no, it's the school's fault.
Well, we paid the school to fix those problems.
Right, so that doesn't make any sense, right? I mean, no school can solve the issues that you're kind of pushing at home.
Schools
you know?
can't parent.
Yeah, they can't at all, right? Especially not when you get to high school and most of their friends are outside, non-Muslim and stuff like this. Especially when you're teaching Islam, is like you said, halal and haram. They're stuck. It's difficult, and it's hard to find those that would be more comfortable in the setting where they see halal and haram, or they see these Islamic values and they appreciate it more. It takes a certain person, right? It takes a certain individual. It takes a certain curriculum to really build that love and respect for the religion, which is really rare. However, still, most of them come out way better than those who come out of public school, and that's just being honest. These examples that we hear about, oh, this kid, she went to Islamic school, but she's like this, those are rare. They're actually rare. You find that most kids that go to Islamic school, at least they have some like elements of Islamic practice, even if it's a little bit cultural. They come out with a little bit more, right? A little bit more zeal, a little more energy in defending the religion, in reflecting on the religion, and trying to practice the religion. This isn't always the case because you have many students coming out of public school that are the same way. But I feel like in Islamic school you're able to do much more, right? At least putting Allah's name in their ear, at least protecting them from certain things. And there's many students that came out of Islamic school that are doing really, really well. And Islamic schools today, as you mentioned earlier, they're very cultural, academic driven, because they have to be. And we see that in lacking in human resources, all these issues, they kind of arise. I don't know how else to describe it.
I mean, that's about as accurate as you can get without being explicit, right?
Yeah.
So when it comes to the state of the Islamic school infrastructure, because you're right, it's not all the same. And I will play. We never play the devil's advocate, but I will play the logical contrarian here. Not all Muslims who come out of public school are all bad either, right? But there is this deception that putting my child in an Islamic school will insulate them against harm. So I pay $400, $500, $800, $1,000 a month to ensure saving my child from exposure to elements that being outside of this bubble would otherwise expose them to. Inversely, there is this deception that if you go to public school, you know non-Muslims. So both are deceptions.
Right.
Just because you put your child in a Muslim majority school does not mean that they will walk away with Islamic values.
Right.
That's something that needs to come through meaningful interactions with meaningful teachers who are able to take the Islamic concepts because curriculum is not enough on its own. You need people who can teach it properly. That will build that rapport. That will foster the love.
For sure.
We all need mentors. In college, same thing. That professor that made you love that field is not like the book that they taught you from. It's different, And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the best of creation, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, the Prophet Muhammad, he was the one chosen to bring the final revelation. Best of creation to bring the final revelation. Because if it was just given to just anybody, then we wouldn't have had the same result. It's the same book from 14 centuries ago, but we do not have the same type of people emulating that character, so no wonder we don't benefit from it. Just like the verse in Surah Al-Jumu'ah, donkeys carrying books on their back. So we have it, but we can't use it because we're not taking the steps to emulate that character-wise. So that's one side, but the other side is, well, those kids who are in Islamic school, they don't know about the real world. Well, just because you go to high school doesn't mean that you know about the real world either. And just because you work with non-Muslims doesn't mean that you know them. Just because they put up Christmas trees in your workplace, or just because you colored in some turkeys on Thanksgiving in elementary school doesn't mean that you've been exposed to American culture. That's a deception.
Absolutely.
Right? And both deceptions have to be broken.
Yeah.
I would say, like, just listening to you, that probably the biggest issue is ROI, return on investment. We pay this much money, so we have this expectation. But that in and of itself is wrong, right? Just because you pay for your child to memorize Quran doesn't mean that they're going to be a walking Quran. Just because you paid for your child to go to an Islamic school doesn't mean that they're going to come out a sheikh or a sheikha or with these types of Islamic ethics. There needs to be more than that, right?
Right.
So what advice would you give to all of the Islamic institutions, by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's permission, that see this, as someone who went through the system, has witnessed people go through the system, and see the results of it in your own life and in the lives of those who you not just came out of it with, but the next generation and the generation after them that are coming through this? How can we break this vicious cycle of that deception, of that talbis iblis, that devil-driven deception? What would you advise them on that?
So that's a big ask. I mean, I can say that we haven't really even begun to dig at all into this issue, because it's a huge issue. And there's a lot of different factors that are involved that we need to, sit down and really discuss openly with a lot of different people that may even hear this and be like, well, this is the same thing that we always hear about. And it's impossible to change it because of X, Y, Z, and they don't know about A, B, C. So, I mean, my advice would just be that, like every person going through the Islamic school or the public school, when you find that person that makes you love their religion, you don't ever look back. And so if we invest in human resources and get proper Quran teachers, and we get proper Islamic studies teachers.
Proper in terms of qualifications? Proper
in terms of, I wouldn't even say qualifications at all, rather just being able to relate to students. We have many people who...
How do I measure that?
How do you measure that? That's a great question. That is a great question. How do you measure that? I mean, from my own experience, my sheikh, he was a bit older. He had the qualifications, however, he was just real. He would just have real talk. And it was my extra exposure to him that really connected me, because the others didn't connect the same way. But it was my time with him in the car, hearing him make these extra jokes, saying these things where I was like, Sheikh, did you really just say that? It was those things that really allowed me to fall in love with the deen. And so not everyone got that, not everyone experienced that. So allowing those moments to occur, looking for those moments, trying to provide for, something like that to occur, meaning meaningful relationship with the Islamic studies, with the Quranic classes, when you actually, put more money into it, put more effort into it, spend more time fostering that relationship, giving them more chances to see their teacher outside of what they normally see them with, making the Islamic studies more relevant instead of just making it, just the same as every other class, because it's not the same as every other class. And so these are the biggest things that stand out, to me personally.
The suhbah that the Prophet ﷺ gave his Sahaba is what allowed for them to be the carriers of the deen. And the suhbah being companionship, Sahaba being his companions. That is what allowed for a greater source of impact. Unfortunately, we pick and choose who gets what companionship, and in many ways, we cut off a lot of people from being able to access the humans that are practicing the religion. So when this way of life is taught from ivory towers, no wonder even people within our ummah feel like it's just not for them.
Right.
I'm secular, I'm feminist, I'm modern, I don't wear hijab, I don't pray, I don't do those things, I'm not this, that, and the third, right? And these are internal issues that we have to constantly address. And speaking to a deeper issue of what you had mentioned, that means that we have to be willing to diversify the people who make these types of decisions. Because it's very easy for us to convince ourselves that we're doing the right thing just because we see progress in terms of property and numbers, But that just means that more kids are just going through the same vicious cycle.
Yep.
So by diversifying that, getting a fresh set of eyes, getting young people involved in stuff, this can put us in a better position.
Absolutely.
Last thing, what advice would you give to non-Muslims about knowing about this internal thing that exists in our community, so that they can hopefully understand us and be more accepting of us as we integrate ourselves in this country?
Well, a person who's not Muslim, it is kind of hard to find Muslims, to be honest, because we hide ourselves so well. So a person who, if you're not a Muslim and you do know someone who is Muslim, then, kind of speaking to those issues that we mentioned, just going out of your way to kind of appreciate someone, or their kid who's finished, or kind of talking to them about that mission that they've accomplished, those milestones they reached. Reaching out and trying to see what they can do in terms of, I don't even know. There's a lot that can be said. I just don't know where to start. What would you suggest?
I would say that sometimes non-Muslims, they see us as especially those who are visibly Muslim, they see us as others.
Yeah.
And they don't see us as people. And they don't know that we go through the same things that their kids go through that are in seminary school or in Catholic school. They don't know that, our community is human like them, even if most of our community comes, second and third generation Muslims from different parts of the world. The kids who are growing up here are Americans, and the only thing that will help them in this identity crisis is being accepted regardless of our differences. So knowing that we are still human, and as Muslims, there's a lot of pandering to get people to accept us, oftentimes to the detriment of our own adherence to Islamic principles. Right. But non-Muslims don't have those same qualms, So accepting us as people and seeing that we are people too, is a great step in the right direction. And knowing that we're people will make it easier for us to have these conversations about our faith, where we're aligned and where we're different. Right. Because at the end of the day, we are still people, and we're all, the children of Adam. So I really appreciate you taking the time to come. I apologize for taking so much of your time, but I really appreciate you pulling up. And we thank our viewers for tuning in for this. Hopefully, these types of conversations are helping us all understand why Islam. Jazakumullahu khairan. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.